Shut up, I do too. Hello everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast based on writers sitting around, drinking quarantinis or coffee and talking about writing, publishing, and the whole creative process. We do not censor ourselves, so consider us PG-13. Your hosts today are David Welsh and me, Jeannie Warner. This is episode 50, Technical Writing for Fun and Profit. Today in the coffee shop, we have Paul Gustafson. Paul is a technical writer and a runner of a whole business, a stable full of other technical writers, of which Dave Welsh is occasionally one. Welcome, Paul.
Well, thank you for having me.
We're delighted to have you be here. I have read a few of the blogs that you have online, and there's a thing that Dave was convinced that you and I would be singing each other's song. People ask me what they should study to succeed in security or life or anything else. And I say, improve your writing, improve your communication ability, because any idea that you have in the world, if you can't coherently state it such a way that everybody understands, you are not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, I'm a fan of that line of thinking. In fact, I think it actually goes farther than that. I think if in order to coherently explain something, you need to understand it, which means, a good writer is a good thinker. And if you're a good thinker, that's a useful skill in life. Not everybody is. The other thing that I would say is, all good communication, all effective communication starts with empathy and understanding who your audience is and what they need from the experience. And that's also a skill set that seems to be in short supply in today's world. So I think good thinking and more empathy, those are things we can use more of.
Well, in terms of empathy, I want to expand that a little bit because I so deeply and core agree with you there. We talk, there's a lot of writers that started out as gamers and D&Ders and readers of fantasy and science fiction and whatever kind of books, great consumers of media in one place and another, because it allows them to put themselves in another world, to read things from another point of view, to think about things from another point of view. So you have the point of view of a character, and then you have the message of the story, which sometimes is at odds with the point of view of the character. For instance, my favorite idea of that is Charles Dickens, who was writing about the poor, the unfortunate, and he used a character of Scrooge to do it. So he took you there, and then how do you teach somebody like Scrooge empathy? And when you learn empathy, you are able to coherently communicate an idea much better. And in return, he became one of the great socially conscious people of his generation, of his time in England, in London in particular, because he was able to empathize, even though he was from a wealthy, made money writing, was from a reasonable family.
Yeah, boy, I like that story. And I think that's, I think we need more of that in today's world. I mean, it's clear that, many of the problems we have are because we have a hard time understanding someone else's point of view. And if we really remind ourselves to carry that empathy into those conversations or try to, I think it gives us a better chance of actually communicating with people that may not share the same point of view as us.
So what do you think? This obviously relates to today's hyper-polarized political situation. What would either of you, obviously if it could be easily solved, you'd have solved it by now, but how do you think it applies to that?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think, in today's information landscape, we don't get information from all points of the spectrum anymore. We all live in our own little custom crafted, optimized for engagement filter bubble. And we share that bubble with other people who are of like minds. And we don't get the stuff that makes us uncomfortable. We only really get the stuff that makes us comfortable. And we get more and more of that. And it gets to the point where, we being the editor for ourselves is dangerous, right? We need someone who can look at the whole landscape of information and help us sort it out. Because there's just so much of it. I listened to an event over the weekend and someone made the comment that information overload leads to information immunity. And it makes it very difficult. We're all drowning in so much information. We're all information addicts. And we're all so overwhelmed by so much of it that when we hear something that doesn't quite fit our worldview, we tend to ignore it.
I'm gonna take an opposing point of that for just one moment on it, because I like the idea and I wanted that to be heard completely. But here was the thought: is it just information overload, or is it? I'm thinking shouty font, because I realized listening to the difference between, this was mid-90s. There was an NPR and they were talking about an old vermiculite mine that had been run by Dow Chemicals and bought 50 years earlier by somebody else, and then they discovered that it had asbestos in it. Now, a lot of people got sick who'd worked in there. They had a higher percentage. And at the beginning, you were like, those mean, terrible people, they have done this to... But then they turned it around and say, well, Dow paid a couple million for the cleanup, even though they hadn't owned it and knew nothing about it. And at the end of it, you were stuck with hearing all sides of the story. And I remember, I think I was riding with you in a car, Dave, and I looked at you like, this is so weird. They didn't tell me how I'm supposed to feel about this. And that is where I think the difference of information overload, I'm going to call it emotional demanding overload. Like, we demand your outrage. And every headline is trying to generate and demand outrage because I think they think that's the only way to get attention.
Well, I think that's part of the bubble, though. I don't think that's just the headlines. I think, to Paul's point, that's what the bubble is. People agreeing with you all the time. And that's how you know what to feel. Or, I don't know.
I think we're all a lot simpler than we'd like to believe we are. And I think the things that make us mad or scare us are easier to identify than we would like to believe. And I think much of what we react to, especially in the social media bubbles, is designed to scare us or make us mad or both. And,
right, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and I think that's part of the bubble. Is it's not just an overload, but it's pushing our buttons and it's trying to manipulate us. And to their credit, they're doing a good job. There are bad actors driving us apart from each other.
Well, I don't think it's just bad actors though either. I mean, I think it's become a mode of communication, and we as consumers are, to the extent that we're also producers, are learning these bad habits from the media we consume. I mean, it takes effort to think about stuff and to consider other points of view, and we often don't. I mean, I get frustrated reading my Facebook feed because so many of my friends, while their opinions are, congruent with mine, but they're using abusive language, or they're being just as tribal as the quote unquote other side in the way that they're expressing themselves.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think we all need to be a little less sure of our own opinions. And I think we all need to be a little more open-minded than we are. And I don't think it takes a lot to flip that situation around. I think we can all, resolve to be a little better, and it'll make a big difference. Right? So
there was something that you wrote in one of your blogs, and I'm going to post it on our site so they can read it. It's a parallel, so bear with me on this story. You were talking about how sometimes for technical writing, engineers and programmers and really, really smart people forget that other people do not know all that they know and have not experienced all that they've experienced. And it is sometimes hard for even very, very intelligent, well-read, traveled people to communicate. And this is where I think that writing is so important, to be able to communicate. How do you, who, let's say that you had children young and so you were forced to take 3 jobs and you've worked 16 hours a day, so you've worked hard your own life, and somebody has to be able to read to you, to teach you, to explain to you, to give you use cases, to see other points of view when you've been working hard and looking down and studying your shoes for the past 30 years. It is a combination of empathy and the reminder constantly of use cases of I need to give you stories that you can understand to and relate to so that I can get you up to the level where we can talk about things on the same keel. And I think writing is key important to that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think, that problem that you described in terms of there being, a big difference in understanding is so common in our industry. We gave it a name. We call it the context gap. And it's the level of understanding. If you're a software innovator, if you're helping create a new piece of software that no one has ever done before, the process of software engineering forces you to understand that information landscape in excruciating detail, because you have to write a program that represents the ideas in whatever application you're building.
So you have to challenge your own assumptions, though. And that's
what it does. It elevates your understanding. It's very similar to when you go on a hike. When you're at the bottom of a mountain and you're looking at the top where you're going to go, you look at that place and you think, man, I'm never going to get there. But what you do is you see where the path starts and you see a tree that's not too far and you think, well, at least I can get to that tree. And then, you make it, you wind your way up to the tree and you think, well, I'm still a long ways away, but I can get to that rock at the next curve. And then you make it there. And then the next little molehill, and then the next, flower bush or whatever it is. And lo and behold, you make it to the top. And you look back, and that perspective is like, well, that wasn't so bad, right? And the same thing happens in abstract landscapes. As you're blazing that trail as a software developer, climbing that mountain of innovation, you're elevating your understanding of that landscape. And, it's a mess, right? Trailblazing is not a clean process. You wind up going down rat holes, and you get to a place where there's a sheer face. You have to go back and try something else a different way. But eventually, through perseverance and work and talent and intelligence, you get there. And then but from that now spot, when you turn around and look at that landscape, it looks a lot simpler, but it's only because you traveled that path. The next person that you're trying to get to use whatever it is that you've created is never going to travel the path that you just traveled to get there, nor would you want them to. So what technical communications is about is giving that new person an elevator that may not get them all the way to the top where you are, but it gets them far enough that landscape, up that hillside, to what we call the threshold of usability, right? Where they can actually get value from the thing you just created. And the only way to get them there is to help them understand enough of that landscape from their point of view, understanding why are they going up that mountain in the first place? It's not, it by definition is different than the reasons you did, right? So you have to,
their problems
you have
are
to
different.
give that to them
Exactly.
in a way that serves their information needs. And that's where empathy comes in. Right? We often find, and a similar problem that's related to this is this notion of push versus pull. Technology providers have a lot to say. They've done a lot of cool stuff. They've built a lot of neat things, and they want to tell you all about it from their perspective. And while that's cathartic for them, it doesn't necessarily help the person that's trying to use the technology. You have to take that information and map it onto what the person who the user is and what they're trying to do, which again is inherently different.
I gotta tell you a story that makes you so completely correct. So I was off.
Have to break
I like those
here.
stories.
I was going to say I was in North.
You tell your story, but I'm gonna Paul, and hold that thought. Paul, one of my functions here on this podcast is to be a contrarian and throw monkey wrenches into the works, especially when things are going too smoothly. And you guys are getting along far too well, so I'm going to do that. Just fair warning. So,
all right.
But go ahead with your story, Jeannie.
Okay, so this was me in Pierre, North Dakota, sitting down, and I was with a bunch of guys that said, we want to talk about a security service that we want to offer this state, plus the federal people there, plus the local university. And they had given us the bios of the people that were going to attend the meeting. And apparently I was the only one who did the reading again. And they had so many assumptions about anybody that was going to use all of this security software. You know, we're going to get it and they're going to use it. And I said, wait a second. And I looked at a woman there because knew it was her. She was the only other chick in the room. And I said, tell everybody your background of how you got a seat at this table. And she was a nice matronly woman who spoke up, and she'd been an admin and she'd been a secretary. She started out as a receptionist, and somewhere a few years ago, the entire state decided to move from McAfee to Norton, and she got put in charge of it because she was a little bit free. So she read the effing manual and she learned how to troubleshoot, and she spent the hours on the phone with tech support, and she wrote up how everybody needed to do every single little thing down to the bit. And she did it so well that they had no problems. So she earned her seat at the security table by understanding the endpoint, reading these technical manuals. But that didn't mean that she knew everything about security or everything about networks or everything about anything else. And so the people that I was with came in talking at a very high level and packet capture and packet loss. And so I said, do you understand what they mean when they say packet? And she's like, I'm hoping it means like the mailman brings it. Like, that's what I thought. Okay, guys, your assumptions are clearly incorrect. Let's back this down a little bit and say, what problem am I going to help her solve? What is her problem? And how do we fix it?
No, I think you have to spoon feed the information to your user. But that higher level information is important too. I mean, if you're in today's, in the modern API economy, chances are you have other software companies who are extending and customizing whatever solution you've created through, an interface of some kind. Right? Go ahead.
Paul, I will wager you that 9 out of 10 people listening to this do not know what you mean when you say API.
So it's just a way for a programmer to use somebody else's code. So instead of writing the code themselves, they can make a special call and get somebody else's code to do that. Provide that bit of functionality so that they don't have to write. Right. So it's engineer to engineer communication. I would assume that many of your listeners have heard the phrase B2B or B2C. Much of what we do at Expert Support is not either of those things. It's what we call E to E communications, engineer to engineer. And so that high level conversation that you heard your architects and developers, when they're talking about how the thing was designed and how it fit together, and what the mechanisms were that worked, that's important too. It's just not as important for the user to understand all that stuff, but it is important to your partners and to your development team, certainly to the new people joining your development team. So, I think, one of the functions that we play is we try to get the right stuff through the right channel to the right audience. And not everything is appropriate or necessary for everybody. You can really optimize things by helping different audience segments accomplish what they're trying to do, and not let all the other stuff that's intended for all your other audiences get in the way of that. Less is often more.
When we're talking about creative writing, there's whole groups of how do you write for middle grade? How do you write for young adult? How do you write for adult? How deep and complicated a language do you use for each of the levels? And the concept is almost exactly the same in technical writing as it is for creative writing in that way. How do you get the right information to the right person by knowing who you want your audience to be, who is your target, how much are you trying to communicate, how complicated is it going to be? And again, that empathy of understanding your reader of what do they want? What do they need? What needs are you going to fill by this? And tell me where your background is. Where did you start? What did you study to end up being a writer?
Well, it's unsurprisingly, technical writing is kind of an orphanage. We get people from all different kinds of background, and I'm really no different. I was in the engineering college at Iowa State. I got a engineering degree in engineering operations, but I also got a degree in journalism. And I found that most of the electives that I was taking were in the journalism department. I like journalism. I like to write. And when I went to work for an AI startup in Palo Alto back in the 80s, if you can believe that. It turns out that knowledge engineering was a thing. It was the AI bubble of its era. And the company I worked for really pioneered many of the techniques at Stanford and other places about how to extract information, how to interview subject matter experts about their field of expertise, and then use that information to model software. I certainly did some of that at that company, but then throughout my career, I always was a person that was in, working in developer relations and trying to explain what the engineers were doing, or in marketing, trying to help explain what the engineers were doing, and hanging out with engineers while I was working in marketing, or working in engineering and hanging out with the biz dev and sales teams trying to explain what we were trying to accomplish. So I've always been a person that kind of formed a bridge between the technologists and the marketing and sales folks. And then prior to landing at Expert Support, that ultimately led to a content marketing agency where I ran a content marketing agency for the better part of a decade, and helped a team of writers and artists, use content to build relationships through content marketing. And that ultimately led me to Expert Support, where I'm now focused on content that's kind of much more technical in nature in most instances, and helping engineers explain the work that they've done in a way that other engineers can appreciate and want to use.
Exactly. When you say content, again, I'm going to explain for a lot of the readers. He means anything that you write, from if you've read a technical article or something in Wired magazine. In Paul's view, that's all content. Articles, journalism, the white papers describing how things are done, the white papers that are quoted in other white papers that are quoted in articles. All of that is the long stream of content.
Yeah, and as are animations and video. That all starts with a script, right? Where you need to have a plan for how you're going to explain something with a video, or an animation that you're going to create. And really, whatever form the content takes, this podcast, in essence, is a form of content.
It absolutely is.
We're creating it on the fly. There'll be a transcript that will, I'm sure, get generated from this thing at some point, and then that will be content, right? So there's a lot of ways to generate it. It's hard to get it right, though, right?
Well, it is, especially when we hear a cantankerous bunch of argumentative people such as we are, Dave.
Speaking of, well, I think there's two sides. Since you brought up content, I think there's two sides to it. I mean, it has taken on a meaning of basically what you just described, of any kind of meaningful writing, or it doesn't have to be transcribed. I mean, this is audio content that we're generating right now. The dark side of content to me is that it's considered in some cases it's considered a commodity, and the content itself is not the important part. It's we need some content for this blog, or we need some content. It's who was it said the medium is the message. That, I think, is a very dangerous, and
they're a marketing major and they should be slapped.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, no, it's a famous quote by, I want to say Lujan or somebody like that, but medium is the message.
David Olin.
Yeah, but I mean, when you're, I mean, the internet is the prime example. When you're like focused on the medium over the message, then there's something wrong there, right? I mean, the words, or the content, so to speak, is what's actually doing the work. It's what's actually important.
I agree with you. There's no shortage of drivel, which is, I think it exploded in response to the search engine, right? Where you're just trying to improve your search rankings. And so you would generate content using a sea of keywords and meta tags to try to get, your link on the search result, a few spaces up on the, not on page 2, but maybe on page 1 and hopefully above the fold if you got there. But, frankly, that was, as the algorithm over time has improved, that kind of drivel has become less and less effective. There are still way too many people creating it, right?
In some ways, yes. But I mean, the question is, what is getting that great search engine rating in service of? And the answer today is advertising. You just want eyes on the page, because if somebody clicks on that page, then it generates a little bit of money for somebody. And it really doesn't matter what that page says. And I think that's part of the problem, is that the incentive is to get eyes on page. The incentive is not to put out quality content that is the end itself.
Yeah.
I mean, in some cases it is. I mean, there are sections of business with content creation, obviously. But I mean, look at something like Medium, where there are a lot of aspiring writers on there, and are people who are actually making a living on there doing writing as kind of just like one-person content mills. I see a lot of the same names over and over and over, and it's all articles that take very little time to write because they're not researched. They're just opinions, and they have clickbait headlines. And the more people they can get to read their stuff, the more microtransactions they get.
But there's a certain piece of that, because there's more than just thoughts, there's feelings. There's some people that can create a narrative in writing that you find interesting or comforting or resonance, like Chaz.
I'm not arguing that there aren't good writers and there isn't good writing and that doesn't find its way onto the internet. I'm just saying that the incentives are perverse for the big money parts of the internet.
That's Calvin, the fourth partner in every episode.
Oh, yeah.
The cat.
Oh, you can hear that, can you?
Yes. Oh, yes, we can.
Yeah, he clearly disagrees with me.
So Paul, how do you, when you,
no idea,
when not just the rants, because it's easy to get on a rant with an idea in a soapbox and climb up and crank out 300 to 500 words. I know, but when you have something that's like there's been boiling around with you, how do you approach it? Give us your method. Are you a pantser or a plotter? How we've been calling it for.
This is her stock question.
It is a stock question.
I think that's a great question. No, I guess I have a fairly undisciplined approach. I will come up with an idea and I will share it with some colleagues to think, hey, I think there's a story to tell about whatever this is, right? Or I'll be in a meeting and we'll hear a concept and somebody will tell a story and say, man, that's a good point. And that goes onto the list, right? And so I have a list of ideas, and there's something comes along, either we're in a customer situation or employee situation where somebody needs to hear the point that we made. And instead of writing an email to them, I will write the blog post and then point it to them. And once we draft it, I have several colleagues review it and get feedback. And so I don't just post stuff. We have a fairly informal but required review step to make sure that we're publishing things that we think reflect how we think about it. So at Expert Support, we have a small audience, and the purpose of the blog is to allow the people that might be considering coming to us for help get to know how we think about things without having to sit on a call like this for a half hour, or in the old days, God forbid, go to a meeting with some people.
No meetings.
If we're successful getting you to the website, and you take the time to read a couple of blog articles, and perhaps one of the articles in our library, which tends to be a little more in-depth and kind of more thought leadership, kinds of content, as opposed to the blog, which is more snackable, to steal a phrase that I don't really like, but it's shorter pieces that are designed to make a single point as opposed to explain a particular topic, which is what the library is about.
But you brought up
if you could read that stuff, if you could look at that stuff, you'll get a sense for how we think about things, and hopefully you'll get a sense that we know what we're talking about. And if you need help with those things, chances are you will, shoot us a note or fill out our form or pick up the phone and call us. And that's how we get most of the new business to our little business, is through referral and through web leads that come to us after they've gotten to know how we think on the website. So it's an important part of how we cultivate those.
I was going to say, Paul, we frequently said that the more that you write, the more that it helps you be able to write, that it becomes a habit, that when you're writing regularly, it's easier to write regularly than if you haven't written settling down. Do you find that to be true?
I do. And I also think it's in the role that I play, I'm the leader at Expert Support. I'm interrupt driven. So, finding time to write and finding time to get away from the interrupts on Slack or an email, and there's always a litany of things that needs attention to go do. It requires some planning, and I'm trying to be flexible about it. I'll plan to write on a Thursday morning, say, and then that just won't happen. I'll have to do it, Thursday night or Friday morning, or sometimes over the weekend. I don't really have a set routine because I need to find the time to do it when the time is, when the rest of the business will give me that freedom.
I hear you. Well, thank you so much for sharing all this with us. I think you've really given a lot of people an idea of what it's like to be a professional writer in a technical field. And we, as I said, our message is over and over again that we really think all paths lead to writing in a certain way. The better your communication skills, the more successful you'll be. So thank you very much for joining us today. And I'm kind of given the pure business side of that. It's really very useful.
Well, I appreciate the invitation, and happy to be a guest.
Well, we'll put links to your website, your company's website, and some of your favorite blogs that you sent me, and other things we mentioned on our website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. You can also find us on Facebook or Twitter. We answer email. You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the hosts. Our main web support magic is brought to you by Deirdre McGaffey-Schween, and our sound engineer and backup web spider is David Welsh. Our intro music is Pretty Maid Milking a Cow, and our exit music is Breakfast with a Morning Person, both by Michael Langberg. You can hear more from Michael Langberg on manyhatsmusic.com or on his YouTube channel. Our podcast sponsor is Jackal Designs, enabling you all to buy cool WDC swag. And hey, thanks for listening.